You can ask me any question you like.
Explanation of embryology, what the Quran has mentioned, and follow that. Have you become Muslim or have you accepted Islam? Why and why not? Thank you.
That's the question I've been asked, of course, hundreds of times, and it's a very logical question. And I'll give you the same answer that I gave in Saudi Arabia, that I gave in Toronto, that I gave in Sudbury a couple of weeks ago, and that I give anywhere I go. And that is that I was raised in a Christian family. My father was a Presbyterian minister, and he taught me to respect all religions, and he said that all those who believe and worship God just have a different way of doing it. So I have no difficulty in understanding that we all worship the same God. Now, it would be different if I didn't have a strong faith of my own. In other words, if I had been an agnostic and didn't believe strongly in God, that obviously I would have probably accepted your religion. But as I was raised and as a Christian and believe as you do that Muhammad was a messenger of God, just as Jesus was a messenger, each bringing messages from God. So I didn't find it difficult when I was told about the Quran that these were revelations from God. It wasn't difficult for me because my own father made it very clear to me that he was called by God to be a minister, to go and talk about God to the people. So in an indirect way, maybe God is telling me that this is the right thing for me to do, to help explain your holy book to you. Now, your scientific colleagues can do this just as well as I can if they have an understanding of embryology. But I've always said that it's probably mean more as a non-Muslim for me to tell people around the world that I believe that what is recorded in the Quran is accurate according to our present knowledge. And as I say, I'm sincere in what I say, is that we just didn't have this knowledge, and some of this knowledge about the genes and the chromosomes has only come to us in the last 10 and 15 years. When I was a student 25 or 30 years ago, we didn't have a lot of the knowledge we have now. And there are a lot of things in the Quran that I was asked questions about, and I said, I don't understand it. And I think that maybe in another 100 years, and I won't be here, but on those verses, if you ask them to the embryologists of that day, they will say, sure, that is what this means. So that to answer your question very simply, I don't feel it's necessary for me to become a Muslim to worship God. I've done that for all of my 60 years. And if anything, though, understanding this just shows me that God has a great influence in this world. That's the best that I can answer that for you. And I have seen some of my colleagues who've been so impressed by what they have read in the Quran and so on, that they have certainly, there have been a few cases where they have converted, and that's fine. And if I'm ever so motivated, I would do the same. But I have a strong belief. It just happens to be a little different way of worshiping God than yours, but we're all worshiping the same God, I like to think, and that if we can work together, we'll have a much happier world. Thank you. A little history of how we got involved, because no matter where we have gone to talk about this, people say, well, how did you get involved in this work? Well, first of all, I was invited to Saudi Arabia to lecture in embryology at King Abdulaziz University in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. And I went there and I gave my lectures, and while I was there, I, at my suggestion, invited Dr. Prasad and Dr. Johnson to come to Saudi Arabia, and they asked them the same questions. And I purposely didn't tell them my interpretations. I wanted them to give their own. So they did, and their answers were similar to mine. Not only that, and I should say that Dr. Johnson is one of the most outstanding embryologists and teratologists in the United States. We didn't just pick anyone. I picked the best. And in Canada, Dr. Prasad at University of Manitoba, where I spent 20 years, is also an outstanding embryologist who has 3 doctor's degrees, plus membership in pathology. So I picked the very best. And then when I started thinking about other embryologists around the world, we brought in Dr. Edwards from Cambridge, who is, some of you remember the early work on in vitro fertilization, where they fertilize the ovum outside the mother because the sperm and the egg can't unite because of a blockage in the uterine tube or fallopian tube. And so they have to fertilize it outside the body, and then they put it in. That's called in vitro fertilization. Now, Dr. Steptoe was an obstetrician, and Dr. Edwards was the embryologist and physiologist who were first successful in fertilizing an ovum outside the uterus or outside the tube, and then putting it into the uterus and having it develop into a baby. And that baby is Louise Brown, who I guess is 12 years old or something now. That is a whole story. But Dr. Edwards is world-renowned for his early work in this area. So we invited him to Saudi Arabia, and again, he was asked the same questions, and they got essentially the same answers. We also have one of my colleagues from Kyoto in Japan, and although he didn't go to Saudi Arabia, he has been consulted and so on. So we have consulted embryologists around the world for their opinions on these statements in the Quran. And it's clear from what Dr. Prasad has said and from all of our work in this area that these statements are correct. The stages, we didn't know about stages, as Dr. Prasad says, until a few years ago. Now we use the stages. We call it stage 1, stage 2. But working with these scholars in Saudi Arabia, we have developed a system of classification which we expect will be used by Muslim medical and other students, health students around the world, because it's a system which follows along with their Quran. In fact, the scholars in Saudi Arabia, along with Dr. Prasad, Dr. Johnson, myself, and others, have translated my book. I have a book in embryology, and they took this and they produced a copy of my book with what they call Islamic additions. So each chapter they put in 3 or 4 pages citing the verses from the Quran, just as you see here, and then the interpretations that they've obtained from me and others in this book. Now, this book is not available for sale as such. You can't go in a bookstore and buy it, but Raheel knows where you can get it. Dr. or I should say Sheikh, his name, Mustafa Ahmad in Chicago, and Raheel has his name and so on, and the copies of this book are available to Muslim societies. I have one copy, and anyone wants to borrow it, you can certainly do that. I've loaned that to some of the students who've written essays on this and so on. So we have been involved, and we're still involved. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to be here. When I was first called about attending this meeting, I didn't think it was going to be possible for me to do so, but I didn't realize at the time that it was a students' association that was inviting me here. Had I known that, I probably would have accepted right away, because I get a lot of invitations from students groups across Canada, United States, and I try to accept as many of those invitations as I can. So I want to tell you about some studies that I and others have done in the last 10 years. I first became aware of the Quran about 10 years ago when I visited Saudi Arabia at the invitation of King Abdulaziz University to lecture in embryology. And at that time I was asked about some of the meaning of some of the verses in the Quran, and I tried to interpret them as best I could, and that really started a study which has lasted for about 10 years in a part-time way, and I've been happy to tell people about these findings, because it's been very inspiring to me, because I've always been interested in the history of embryology, and some of the early history is not very well known to us.